everyone, it's Michelle here. For today's card, I'm pulling out this stamp set from the Alleyway Stamps called It's My Party, and I used this set in my last card, but I just used the balloon, so this time I wanted to use the cute little characters that come in this set, and they're just these little turtles that you can kind of stamp together to put them together in fun ways. So for this card, I thought it would be fun to stack two of them on top of each other. I have some 110-pound white cardstock here, and it's been cut to 4¼ by 5½. And once I've figured out which way I want the card to go, I'm going to stamp this in My Favorite Things hybrid ink. And this ink works really well with Copic markers, and that's how I'll be coloring in these images after. So I went ahead and stamped the top turtle first. And before I stamp the bottom one, I want to do a little bit of masking just so that it looks like the top turtle is sitting on the bottom one a little more, because otherwise they would overlap or I would have to leave a little space, and I want to make it look like it's almost like one continuous image. So I just stamped that on some thin typing paper, and I just trimmed out the bottom part, the part that would be overlapped with the stamping, and I placed that on top and then stamped the bottom image. So now you can see how it looks like it's perfectly sitting on top of the other turtle. So I pulled out my Copic markers, and I'm just going to be doing some really simple coloring here. I'm starting off with the presents and the hats, and I'm just filling in some really bright colors because for the turtles I'll just be using green and browns, so I want to make sure that these other elements really pop out. And I'm just doing some simple coloring here using 1 or 2 shades of each color, and then doing some simple blending with that. Then for the turtles, I filled in most of the spaces with a light green, and then just went in and shaded in some areas with a medium green. And I also added a little bit of a third shade just to add some darker areas of color. And this is all just really simple Copic coloring technique, and I just really used the colors that I had, and they're probably a little brighter than what is realistic, but I think that's totally okay when you're making a fun card like this. For the bottom part of the turtle and the shell, I actually used skin tone colors and then kind of kept layering these colors on top of each other until it was as dark as I wanted it. And later on I actually go over this with green, which you can see here, and it kind of turned out a little bit weird, so I went over it again with the beige color, but I just wanted to try something out and add a little bit more of the green color. So you can color these however you want, but this is just what I went with. So the next thing I want to do is a really cool technique with tissue paper, and I think this is kind of a cool thing to do because you wouldn't normally use this on a card, but I had some on hand and I figured I could try to make kind of like an ocean scene with this tissue paper. So I have some green and also some blue, and I just ripped off some smaller pieces of these, and I'm going to be trimming these to look like waves. So this is the blue one, and you can't really see the blue, but once you overlap them on top of each other, the color really builds up more. So you can see I'm just taking my scissors and cutting some random wave shapes. It doesn't have to be perfect because you're not going to see much of each layer anyway. So I'm trying to alternate which way the waves go, and making sure that some of them are taller and some of them are shorter so that they'll be good for layering. And once I finish with those, I'm moving on to the green piece. And you can see how the blue waves are already starting to build up a more rich blue color once you layer them on top of each other. So now I'm just taking all these pieces that I've cut and I'm layering some blues in between the greens so that they're kind of alternating. And once I have them set in the order that I like, I'm going to be adhering these to my cardstock with Mod Podge. And I have this giant bottle of Mod Podge here, and it has a matte finish. And I'm doing this on top of some scrap paper because it does get a little bit messy. And I have this inexpensive foam brush that I'm going to be using to spread the Mod Podge with. And one thing to keep in mind is you only need a very, very thin layer for this because the tissue paper is already so thin and you don't want it to get kind of like a soggy mess. So sometimes I will dip my brush into the Mod Podge, and sometimes I'll actually just use whatever is left over and not have to dip it in at all. So you can see I dipped it once and used it like 2 or 3 times before I have to dip it in again. This way it doesn't get too wet. And once I finished with the top layer, I went over the top entirely except for the little flap parts, and I also went under some of the flaps if it was sticking up a little too much, but I kind of wanted it to have some dimension, so I left some of the top parts of the waist hanging. So I just want to make sure that's not sticking to the paper, and then I set that aside to dry. And after that's dry, which you can see here, I turned it around and trimmed off all of the excess pieces. I did this with an X-Acto knife because that was easier for me, but you can also just use some plain scissors along that edge. So now I'm going to go back and kind of fluff up those edges again so that there's a little more dimension and it's not so flat because the tissue paper is kind of thin. So just by wrinkling up those edges, you can see the different waves better to see all the layers. So now I'm going to add a sentiment in the top left corner where there's space there. I am embossing the birthday wishes sentiment. So I use my Versamark ink pad and some Ranger liquid platinum embossing powder, which is a really pretty silver embossing powder. So I went off screen and heat set that, and now you can see how pretty and shiny that is in the corner. And it's just the perfect space for a sentiment since it was empty there. And now I'm going to adhere this to my card base with my tape runner. I made sure to put a lot of adhesive because that bottom part where I did that technique with the Mod Podge was a little wrinkled because of the layers of glue that we put there. And then I rounded the top corner of the card where the sentiment was just to add a little bit of interest. And then I pulled out my little container of embellishments, and I'm going to be adding some sequins here, and I pulled out some clear sequins and then some teal, green, and blue just to bring in all of the different watery colors that I used for the tissue paper. And I'm using some liquid adhesive to adhere those with some tweezers, and you can see how I also popped some of those sequins in under the layers of tissue paper or just peeking out a little bit, and I think this just really helps to accentuate all the layers of tissue paper as well and kind of gives it a more fun look. So there's the finished card, and here are some photos of that. And in the photos you can really see how those sequins are tucked in there. And I just thought this was a really fun effect, and this tissue paper technique is a really cool way to bring in something you probably have on hand but might not have thought to use on cards. So I hope this video gave you some inspiration to pull that tissue paper out. If you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up so that YouTube knows that you want to see more videos like this, and make sure to also subscribe to my channel. On screen here I also have some links for you to my 3 most recent videos, so if you enjoyed this one then make sure to check those out as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.